So the first peoples of Kentucky, video 11. Right. That's how you do 11. So let's run through these questions, and then let's answer them. Question 60, what's the derogatory exonym for the Lakota or Dakota peoples? What's the derogatory exonym for the Lakota, also known as the Dakota? So Lakota, Dakota peoples, they're called something else by their enemies. What is that name? Question 60, who was Chief Gris, a.k.a. the Gray? Gris means the Gray, Legris. I think it's French. So who is Chief Gris? Do you know who Chief Gris was? Well, Google it. You'll find out who Chief Gris is. What is Kennekuk's? What was Kennekuk's, the Kickapoo Prophet, the leader of the Vermillion band of the Kickapoos' lasting legacy? So the Kennekuks. Who are the Kennekuk? This is a man. He's a Kickapoo Prophet, the Kennekuk. What's his lasting legacy? He's the Kickapoos. The Shawnee were some of the most vicious, strongest fighters out there, but so were the Kickapoos. But Kennekuk, he was a little bit differently. He believed in nonviolence, but he did believe in self-defense. And his lasting legacy is what? So Kennekuk, who is he? What's his lasting legacy? Question 63. How many Shawnee scalps did John J. Hardin, born 1753, namesake of Hardin County, Kentucky, collect in August 1789 during his Terre Haute, Indiana expedition? How many scalps did he collect? Shawnee scalps. Question 64. What was the Fox tribe's autonym? Right? So autonym is what you call yourself. Exonym is what people call you. So the Fox tribe, they did not call themselves the Fox tribe. What did they call themselves? Question 65. Who did James Wilkinson name Frankfort after? James Wilkinson, the star of the Spanish conspiracy. Who did he name Frankfort after? Question 66. Who is Stephen Frank? He's important to the first peoples of Kentucky. Who is Stephen Frank? Question 67. Where, when, and by whom was Abraham Linkhorn, the United States 16th president's grandfather, murdered? Abraham Lincoln, his father is Thomas Lincoln. Thomas Lincoln's father is Abraham Linkhorn, which they changed their last name. Abraham Lincoln is not what his grandfather was. His grandfather's name was Linkhorn, but he called it Lincoln to sound it more, to make it more anglicized. In fact, I heard that Linkhorn is a German name, so Abraham Lincoln could have been German. But he was murdered. Where, when, and by whom? He was murdered in Kentucky. I'll give you that. But where at in Kentucky? And when and who? Who killed him? Question 68. How many Kentucky counties were named after the participants of the War of 1812? Kentucky has 120 counties. 9 of the participants of the Battle of Frenchtown, which was part of the War of 1812, are Kentucky county names now, right? So 9 of Kentucky counties was named after the participants of the Battle of Frenchtown, but overall there was more. So how many Kentucky counties were named after the participants of the War of 1812? Question 69. How many Kentuckians fought in the War of 1812? Specifically, I want a specific number. Okay, it's in the thousands. I'll give you a hint, and I'll give you. It's in the thousands, right? But the last 3 numbers is 0, 1, 0. So 10 something 10. If that helps at all. So how many thousands of Kentuckians fought in the War of 1812? And then question 70. What immortal words did Andrew Jackson utter after many Kentuckians arrived for the Battle of New Orleans without any weapons or provisions? So you have all these Kentuckians who show up to the Battle of New Orleans to, fight the British, and they didn't have any weapons or provisions. So Andrew Jackson says, "Oh my God, I've never seen a Kentuckian without these 3 things." What are those 3 things that Andrew Jackson? What 3 things did Andrew Jackson think that a Kentuckian always had on them? So question 60. What's the derogatory exonym for the Lakota or Dakota peoples? The Sioux. So anytime people talk about the Sioux Indians, you're actually using the name of the enemies. Whenever you say Winnebago or Fox or Sioux, you're using the name that the enemies had put on them. It reminds me of marijuana and the spruce goose. It used to be cannabis or hemp is what marijuana was called, but then when they made it illegal, Anslinger, he called it marijuana to give it a nasty sounding name, so therefore it's propaganda, right? That's why you rename people. It's for propaganda to make them hate them. The Dakota people, the Lakota and the Dakota, they're both, those are two proper names, Dakota or Lakota, which is what South Dakota, North Dakota, these are the people that they're named after. Their enemies called them the Sioux. And it's weird actually how the enemy's names can they take over for it. Marijuana is known as marijuana today, right? It's also the same plant as hemp and cannabis, right? But the marijuana pervades today. Spruce goose, the same thing. You had that one guy, that sort of crazy guy that Leonardo DiCaprio had played. But he had that big plane, and the politician was like, "Oh, that spruce goose will never fly. He's crazy." But that's Howard Hughes. Okay, that was Howard Hughes. But the spruce goose, he didn't call it the spruce goose. That's what the politician had called him, and that's what I know it for today. So we should give the Ho-Chunk people, the Dakota people, and the Meskwaki people the benefit of the doubt that they know who they are, right? The Dakota people know who they are better than anybody else. They are not the Sioux. The Ho-Chunk people, I think, is actually more of a I'm not sure what actually Sioux means, but the Ho-Chunk people, that name means the people of the original language, whereas the Winnebago is the exonym, the derogatory name that their enemies have put on them, and the Winnebagos were known as the smelly people, the stinky people. So that's not something the Ho-Chunk people want to be called, the stinky people. Who wants to be called that? So clearly, when people call them the Winnebagos, it's easier to remember, it's anglicized or whatever, and it's derogatory and it's mean. And if you use Winnebago today, if you use Sioux today, if you use the Fox tribes today, you're using the exonyms. The autonyms are what we should be using for these tribes. Who is Chief Gris, aka the Gray? Chief Gris was a chief of the Pepicokia band of the Miami tribe. Chief Gris was one of the three important Miami leaders during the Northwest Indian War, along with Pacane and Little Turtle. P-A-C-A-N-N-E and Little Turtle. So you got George Washington, who's trying to kill all the Shawnee and Miami Indians in the Northwest Indian War in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, right? That general area. The Northwest, right? You had the Eastern Seaboard, which was where the colonies were, and they wanted to go west. The Northwest was in Ohio, and that's where you got Chief Gris, okay? He's fighting with Little Turtle and a guy named Pacani. John J. Hardin, namesake of the Hardin County, was ordered by Hamar to see how powerful Gris's Miami village was. Okay, so Chief Gris is a Miami village at the time, and then you have George Washington, who sent Hamar, and you got Hamar's defeat, St. Clair's defeat. Within Hamar's defeat, Hamar had sent Hardin to go check to see how powerful Gris's Miami village was, and then that's where you get Hardin's defeat. And Chief Gris is also known to he had signed the Treaty of Greenville when Mad Anthony Wayne had conquered, the Great Northwest at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1754, which is kind of incredible, right? Mad Anthony Wayne, he's a psychopath, he's insane, he's nuts. They call him Mad Anthony, mad because he's a Mad Hatter, right? He's mad, he's going crazy. He's not a Mad Hatter, but he's mad, right? He's nuts. But since Hamar wasn't able to do anything, St. Clair wasn't able to conquer these Native Americans in Ohio, so George Washington, the Kennekuk, the town destroyer, who wiped out all the Iroquois with a scorched earth campaign, terrorism, right? So George Washington's this horrible terrorist that just wants to clear the land of all the Native Americans to make way for the English colonists. He sends Mad Anthony Wayne to go kill all these Native Americans, and he's a psycho, crazy, and he does whatever he needs to do, and then eventually he wins the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794, and he gets Chief Gris to sign the Treaty of Greenville. And none of the Native Americans should ever sign any of the treaties, because even the ones, they're all, reneged on. So even the ones that seemed like they was helping them, then they turned around and basically screwed the people over. Question 62, what was Kennekuks, the Kickapoo Prophet, and the leader of the Vermillion band of the Kickapoos, lasting legacy. The lasting legacy of Kennekuk is he signed a treaty. That's what a lot of the lasting legacies of these Native Americans are. We don't know anything about their lives or what they had done, who they, likes and dislikes were, but we do know that they signed their name to these treaties, which allowed the Americans to take the land that they historically had been sitting on. So Kennekuk, he's a Kickapoo prophet. So right, the Shawnee are really vicious warriors who just aren't going to do anything. The Kickapoos are similar, right? The Kickapoos are vicious warriors. This is our homeland. We'll if we have to die to defend this, then we'll die. But the Kennekuk, who is the leader of the Vermillion band of the Kickapoos, he signed the Treaty of Castor Hill in 1833. So 1833, this is way past War of 1812, but he signs the treaty, and then that rids Missouri and Illinois of the Kickapoo. So finally, the Americans were able to make the Kickapoos submit, kick him out of Illinois, kick him out of Missouri, and then they made him live on a reservation on the Missouri River in Kansas, where eventually Kennekuk died of smallpox. So they did get rid of him. It's a mixed legacy with him, because I think the Kickapoo of today would know who Kennekuk is, especially if that reservation is still there today in Kansas. Question 63, how many Shawnee scalps did John J. Hardin, 1753, collect in August 1789 during the Terre Haute Indian expedition? 12. John J. Hardin, namesake for Hardin County, Kentucky, he marched into Indiana, went to a Shawnee village, right? He invades, he probably killed 12 people and chopped off the top of their heads. That's what the scalp is, right? The scalp, they just chop off the head, they pull the hair and just kind of cut the skin off and pull it off. And Henry Hamilton and some of these British folks would actually buy these scalps. But this is an American, this is a Kentucky man, a frontiersman, who goes to the Shawnee village, and he's collecting scalps for, I guess, to show his white buddies, hey, look, I'm a murderer, savage, genocidal maniac too. And he got 12 scalps, so he brings 12 scalps back. Question 64, the Fox tribe's autonym. I had mentioned this actually with the Sioux question earlier and the Dakota. And the Fox tribe's autonym is Meskwaki. So we should not call them the Fox tribe. They're the Meskwaki tribe. So there's the Meskwaki people, the Dakota people, and the Ho-Chunks. That's who they are, okay? So the Meskwaki people, that's their name. They're not the Fox, not the Sioux, not the Winnebago. It's Lakota, Meskwaki, Ho-Chunk. Dakota or Lakota. Both of those names work for the Dakota people. South Dakota, North Dakota. I'll probably stick with Dakota to kind of catch them all. I think the Lenape or the Lenai is the Delaware, right? They call them the Delaware, but that's exonym. They call themselves the Lenape. The Ho-Chunks call themselves the Ho-Chunks. Dakota call themselves the Dakota, and the Meskwaki call themselves the Meskwaki. And the Meskwaki knows who the Meskwaki people are. They knows who they be. Their name is not Toby. Their name is Kunta Kinte, right? Meskwaki. That's who they are. That's the Fox tribe's autonym. Question 65. Who did James Wilkinson, the star of the Spanish conspiracy, name Frankfort after? He named him after a man named Stephen Frank. Stephen Frank was a Jewish British-American salt boiler frontiersman pioneer from Bryan Station. So he's in Kentucky, around the Kentucky River in 1780. He was shot by the native redskin Kentuckians. So he was shot by the some Indians. I don't know who. Could be anybody, right? Could be the Wyandots, the Pianki Shaw. Who knows? But he shoots the native redskin Kentuckians while boiling salt at a natural crossing on the Kentucky River in 1780, 6 years before Frankfort is established. And because Stephen Frank was shot by the Indians, the James Wilkinson names that part of the river where you can cross to Kentucky, because it was a natural crossing, you could just cross over it. That's why they were mining salt there. But they named that part of the river Frank's Ford, right? So just like the Oregon Trail, you get your you have your wagon, and to ford it up, you put everything inside the wagon and you float it across. So they called it Frank's Ford. If you needed to cross the river, that's where you crossed, right at Frank's Ford. And then eventually Frank's Ford turns into Frankfurt. So it's not named after Frankfurt, Germany, but it's named after Stephen Frank of Frank's Ford. So that's James Wilkinson had actually named him, which is interesting because he was working for the Spanish crown. He almost got all Kentuckians speaking Spanish. If James Wilkinson had his way, we would have been a colony of Spain, and we wouldn't have had anything to do with the French or the English. So who was Stephen Frank? I already mentioned that. He was a British American. He started out as British, became American, right? 1780. This is during the Revolution when he got shot. But British American is kind of like Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone pledged allegiance to the British crown until he got court-martialed, and then he had to say, no, I'm an American. Please, don't hurt me. Question 67. Where, when, and by whom was Abraham Linkhorn, the United States 16th president, his grandfather, murdered? He was murdered in Kentucky. He was murdered in Louisville in Jefferson County, May 1786 by the Shawnee. Okay, so there is a historical marker for Linkhorn in Eastwood, Kentucky. So the story is you have Abraham Linkhorn. He's got 1,000 acres. He's out there doing his, planting or whatever he's doing. And you got a Shawnee Indian who's out in the forest, and he shoots him, kills him, and he drops, right? So Abraham Linkhorn is dead. Linkhorn, I've heard that was German, and they changed the name. Abraham Lincoln is not who his grandfather was, but we go with Abraham Lincoln. So, okay, so the granddad's dead, right? So what do the kids do? You got a 13, 15, and 8-year-old. Josiah, the 13-year-old, runs to the nearby frontier fort, Hughes Station, to get some help. Thomas Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's father, he's only 8 years old, but he's terrified. He just saw his old man just got shot, and he's terrified. He's just starstruck or whatever, just sitting there, don't know what to do. And Mordecai, he's 15 or 16 years old. The eldest brother runs to the cabin to get his father's gun. So he goes in to get his gun. As he's doing that, the Shawnee Indian that had murdered Abraham Linkhorn is now coming in to get Tom Lincoln, Abraham's father, his future father at least. Mordecai, his older brother, gets his father's gun and shoots and kills the Indian right before he's able to kill Thomas's life. So Mordecai saves Thomas's life. If it wasn't for Mordecai, we wouldn't have had Abraham Lincoln. So that might have also been the reason why Abraham Lincoln wiped out the Dakota. There was a big Dakota War of 1862, and he wound up hanging like 38 of them on some trumped-up charges. The biggest mass execution in American history was by Abraham Lincoln. And also, Abraham Lincoln was the man who had signed the Homestead Act. And the Homestead Act was to give 140 acres to any person, 150, 140 acres or so. 160 maybe, 160 acres. Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, to anybody that would sign a petition or sign an application and pledge to take care of the land for 5 years. So if you could fill out your name in an application and promise that you could take care of the land for 5 years, then you could go out and steal whatever Indian land that you wanted to out west. So that's another thing that's his bias towards the Native Americans, because his grandfather was murdered by the Native Americans, and I'm sure Thomas, who's only 8 years old, that's probably a very indelible memory that he probably can never shake. So that's the story of Abraham Linkhorn. Question 68: how many Kentucky counties were named after participants of the War of 1812? 22 of Kentucky's 120 counties were named after Kentuckians who had participated in the War of 1812. So that's a lot of Indian killers. A lot of legacy of Indian killing here in Kentucky. At least a fifth of the counties in Kentucky were named after those who had fought in the War of 1812. And in fact, we had given up 64% of those who had died in the War of 1812 were Kentuckians. So the British never invaded Kentucky. There was no incursions into Kentucky by the 1800s. But more Kentuckians had died in the War of 1812 than in any other state or any other group of people. Question 69, how many Kentuckians fought in the War of 1812? Specific number, 25,010. Okay, so if you just remember 25,010, right? So 25,000 I'd probably accept, or 26, around that number, but 25,010 is the number that I came up with. Question 70, what immortal words did Andrew Jackson utter after many Kentuckians arrived for the Battle of New Orleans without any weapons or provisions, right? So the Kentuckians come to the Battle of New Orleans to fight, but they don't have anything, no provisions, no food, I guess they got a shirt on their back, but really not much more. So Andrew Jackson says, man, I've never seen a Kentuckian without a gun, a pack of cards, and a bottle of whiskey in my life. Well, how are you going to call yourself a Kentuckian? You don't have a gun, you don't have a pack of cards, and you don't got a bottle of whiskey. That's Andrew Jackson, right? So those are moral words because that's how he sees the Kentuckians. I've never seen a Kentuckian without a gun, a pack of cards, and a bottle of whiskey in my life. That's the first peoples of Kentucky. 11.